to News Nation's coverage of Super Tuesday. A lot of stories being written about the future of this election tonight. We're waiting on former President Donald Trump. He's going to be speaking in a few minutes. We will go to him live at Mar-a-Lago when he does. But first, let's bring in David Bossie, co-chair of the 2024 RNC Committee on Arrangements. It is good to see you, Mr. Bossie.
Good to be back.
So, how upset are you tonight that Trump has taken this beating across all these key states and Nikki Haley is clearly on her way?
Nikki who? You know, this has not been a race. I think everybody now this evening will come to the conclusion this was never a race. Just because one person, Nikki Haley, decides to stay in a race doesn't make it an actual race. This has never been anything but Donald Trump's victory from Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and on till this evening. Right. This race is over. We're on to the general election.
Okay, serious question now. So what does this tell you, the Nikki Haley story? Well, there's a built-in negative. It's masqueraded Democrats in open primaries. Is there any aspect of this, Dave, that gives the team pause that, hey, we have to close ranks. There's a certain group of voters / donors that we need to go to. We learned that from this process, and Nikki Haley is a proxy for that. If so, who and what did you identify?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not that it gives you pause. It tells you what work you have to do. It tells you what we need to communicate, the messaging that we need to really have, the strengths that Donald Trump has. We need to match those up with the messages that need to be delivered to deliver those votes. And let's just talk about the polling over the last week or so. We saw in I believe it was the New York Times poll, 97% of those people who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 say they will vote for him again this time. That is a phenomenal number, I'll be honest with you. The real problem is Joe Biden's, where only 85% of those who said they are going to, that they voted for Joe Biden in 2020 are going to vote for him again. That is a big problem. We need to be attacking that 15% every single day between now and November. 8 months from today is Election Day. We have to save this country from the socialist agenda of Joe Biden. And I think the American people are with us. When we talk policy, we win every day.
You have a very negative climate, right? You have more than 2 in 3 Americans say, I don't like either of these guys. I wish we had something different. And you're not able to address that. You're going to have to deal with the ball where it is. And you're on Team Trump for that. That makes the vice presidential pick more important, arguably. Bill O'Reilly said earlier on the show tonight, Dave, that it should be Governor Sanders from Arkansas. I haven't heard that name get a lot of traction. Have you heard anything about her?
I love the governor. The governor of Arkansas is fantastic, great friend of mine. I have not heard that. That would be a surprise to me, but I've been surprised before in this business, Chris. I think we all have. Look, Mike Pence served an incredible purpose when he was chosen in 2016 and did a great job on the campaign trail. Donald Trump, this is now a binary choice between Donald Trump's agenda for America, what his portfolio was when he was president of the United States for 4 years, versus Joe Biden's last 3 years of utter chaos and destruction of America. And that's what we're going to. That's what. But that's what people are going. That's right, Chris. Absolutely.
You don't think it's a flavors of crazy contest?
And well, no, I don't. I think this is about policy. You look at the polling data, look, you see what Donald Trump did tonight. He devastated across the political spectrum from one coast to the other. He is going to do that again in November. He is going to win in a big way because the American people are with him on the economy, on national security, and on closing this open border that is our southern border. He is going to educate the American people over the next 8 months about the policies, the destructive policies of Joe Biden, and what his record was in the 4 years of his presidency. I don't believe that we're going to be in any other place, Chris, but a policy discussion for the next 8 months. I hope that's the case.
First of all, that would be amazing. But I don't know how many bets you and I have racked up, but I'll certainly add this one to it because, you know, it's just so tempting in this zero-sum two-party system, Dave, to just attack the other guy as being, you know, oh, you think I'm crazy. This guy can't walk up the stairs. Oh, you think I can't walk up the stairs. This guy wants to be Caesar. I mean, you know, there's no room for policy in a hate contest.
I think we're going to have a lot of policy. I think we're going to have a lot of policy. I think it's one of the reasons that you're going to see Joe Biden not want to be on a debate stage against Donald Trump because he's afraid of what that's going to look like.
To a number of debates, Dave. What do you want to think about that? Do you think Trump would want 3, 4, or 5 debates?
I have no idea tonight. If I'm Donald Trump, absolutely. If I'm Donald Trump, I want as many debates as humanly possible against this guy who is not. Look, we all see what's going on with his cognitive abilities. He is. If you look at Joe Biden 3 years ago during the 2020 campaign versus today, your average American sees it. They know it. They understand it. They see it in their own families. They see it in Joe Biden. And they're nervous about him continuing on to be the leader of the free world. And that's a fact.
There's absolutely apprehensions. But you also have a reciprocal concern, right? Which is that there's enough concern center left that Donald Trump wants to be Caesar, that they say, well, we got to go with this guy. Somebody prop him up because the other side's too scary. And that's why you have 2 out of 3 of the American people say we wish we had different choices. But anyway, let's see what the former president says.
New York.
Go ahead, Chris,
Dave. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. But in that New York Times poll, 10% of those who voted for Joe Biden, a full 10%, said they were going to switch their vote for Donald Trump this year. That is a devastating number
if true,
for Joe Biden. What it does is it's counter to what your argument is. I agree that Joe Biden has nothing to run on from a policy standpoint. He has no accomplishments whatsoever that he's proud of. He has to sling mud. He has to make it about personalities.
All right.
I totally agree with you that that's going to be what they're doing, but they're not going to win
just to be
doing
clear,
that this year.
The more policy, the more better as far as I'm concerned. But I think there is a case for Biden to make. I don't know that he's going to make it to people's satisfaction. There's certainly a hunger for it. But we'll see. We'll see, in fact, in just a few minutes to see which way the former president, Donald Trump, takes what tonight means. And Dave Bossy, you're always welcome to be part of the conversation. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Dave Bossy. Nobody understands the dynamic inside the Trump team better than he does. Let's take a break. When we come back, Donald Trump is going to describe why tonight happened the way it did. Is he going to say anything about Nikki Haley? Is he going to take a new tack on Biden? Is he going to talk policy? I sell on that third proposition. Next. DDHQ can now project that President Biden has lost the Democratic caucus in American Samoa to businessman Jason Palmer. So
51-40.
51-40.
Okay, Chris Starwell, what's going on in American Samoa?
Well, that's a very small number of human beings to have to win, and not since Michael Bloomberg did it in 2020 have we seen this sort of a groundswell of Samoan support.
They're probably not that nervous at the White House. I'm just guessing. We'll go to Chief Washington correspondent Blake Berman, also host of The Hill, who is at the White House where precisely nobody has been watching the returns of America Samoa. What do you think the calculus, Blake, is? You've got network specials, 10 to 11 p.m. Eastern across the time zones. All the networks will carry Donald Trump's speech live here in the next couple of minutes when he comes out. What is the calculus at the White House of not speaking tonight?
Well, look, the president is here at the White House. He was at Camp David, but he's here at the White House getting ready for Thursday night, the State of the Union address. That is the big event for President Biden. That's one of the benefits of the bully pulpit, right, is to be able to go before the American public once a year, State of the Union, normally this time, February, March. And so that is where his focus is right now. Obviously, tonight, we all know how this was going to play out, except for American Samoa for President Biden. But I can tell you, Leland, I checked in with the campaign, the Biden campaign, a little while ago, and I asked them, hey, what do you make it tonight? Any takeaways? And they said to me, one of their takeaways was that Donald Trump has big issues with suburban and moderate voters within the Republican Party. Chris Stirewalt can talk to that, about what's actually happening with moderate and suburban Republicans, but that's their take right now, Leland.
Probably the only thing that the Trump campaign, the Biden campaign agree on right now is that the general election starts today as we wait for Donald Trump to come out. That would make it, I think, Chris Stirewalt, the longest general election in history. Here comes Donald Trump for what will be the opening of that. We'll see what he has to say. We'll see which Donald Trump we get. Do we get Iowa Donald Trump? Do we get New Hampshire Donald Trump?
We're going to get Donald Trump listening to his theme song.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a while before we get to the speaker.
Right. But we do this every time, is that we go to him as soon as we see him, and then we have to sit and wait and listen to the whole song.
But let me just say, Joe Biden and Blake highlights it. On Thursday, Joe Biden is going to benefit from low expectations. He's going to have a great moment to overcome low expectations at the State of the Union address. If he can do it, it's great. Donald Trump has a moment to overcome low expectations right now. Leland points out he's timed it well. The eyeballs are there. Everybody's watching. If this guy could go up to that podium and congratulate Nikki Haley on a race well run.
Be magnanimous.
And say that I really appreciated her service in my administration. I appreciated she ran a great race. And now it's on to November. I invite her to join us. If he could do that, he would say, oh, that was quite, the magnanimity bar is extraordinarily low for Donald Trump, and he could surmount it.
I'm wondering how many of the networks, to Leland's point, this is a time that you do your network specials. I wonder how many of them are taking him versus waiting for him to speak. He's going to start speaking right now, so now's the time to go to him. Here's Trump.
Well, thank you very much. They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time. We've watched our country take a great beating over the last 3 years, and nobody thought a thing like this would be possible. We wouldn't have Russia attacking Ukraine. We wouldn't have Israel being attacked. Iran, as you know, was broke. When I was running things, they were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah. We had no inflation. Inflation is destroying the middle class. It's destroying everything. Inflation, if you look back over the history, hundreds of years back, inflation is called a country buster. And that's what it's doing to our country. What's happened with inflation has been unbelievable. A lot of people say, a lot of experts have said the stock market's the only thing that's doing well, and that's doing well because our poll numbers are so much higher than Joe Biden's. He's the worst president in the history of our country. There's never been anything like what's happening to our country. Today it was announced that 325,000 people were flown in from parts unknown. Migrants were flown in, airplane, not going through borders, not going through that great Texas barrier that I was with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, the other day, and we were looking at the job they're doing. But in the meantime, they're pouring into California and they're pouring into Arizona because those governors aren't doing anything. They're doing nothing. But today it was just announced before I came out. It was unbelievable. I said, that must be a mistake. They flew 325,000 migrants, flew them in over the borders into our country. So that really tells you where they're coming from. They want open borders, and open borders are going to destroy our country. We need borders and we need free and fair elections, or we don't have a country. This is an incredible group of people. so many celebrities that I'm not going to introduce any because I'm just going to get myself in trouble if I do that, because I'll leave out most of you. But this is a room chock full of incredible, talented people, like some of the guys standing right in front of me, right? Big futures, big, fat, beautiful futures. Oh, I'd love to be your age. I'd pay you a lot of money to be your age. But we have some tremendously talented people in this room, including tremendously talented political people that have helped me right from the beginning. We had the safest border in the history of our country. We built 571 miles of wall. We had Mexico supply us with 28,000 soldiers because we wanted them, that's why. And they said, we won't do that. I said, yes, you will, you will. And in the end, they did. It was an easy negotiation, but we had the safest border, the best numbers we've ever had, and now we have the worst numbers probably in the history of the world. It's sad to see what's happening to our cities. Our cities are being overrun with migrant crime, and that's Biden migrant crime. But it's a new category of crime, and it's violent, where they'll stand in the middle of a street and have fistfights with police officers, and if they did that in their countries from where they came, they'd be killed instantly. They wouldn't do that. So the world is laughing at us. The world is taking advantage of us. 3 years ago, we were at a level, we were energy independent. We were going to be very shortly energy dominant, and today we're getting oil from Venezuela. Can you believe it? And we're doing numbers on that oil. You know what we're doing? We're refining the oil. We have our refinery for that oil. It's really, I call it tar. It's not oil. It's terrible. We have real stuff. But we're refining it in Houston. So for all of the environmentalists, you ought to look at that, because all of that tar is going right up into the atmosphere. You just ought to take a look. It's the only plant that can do it. We have the only plants that can take tar and make it into oil, and that's what it is. It's a shame. But we were energy independent. We were going to be energy dominant. We were going to be supplying oil to Europe, all over the world. And then a tragic thing happened during the election. It was a tragedy, because you wouldn't have, think of it, all of the problems that you have today, I don't think you would have had any of them. You'd only have success. And that's what's ultimately going to unify this country and unify this party. We have a great Republican Party with tremendous talent. And we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I have been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country, and it happened before. We had the best economy our country's ever had, and people were calling me that I would have said will never happen. It'll never happen. They wanted to get together African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, women, men, people with diplomas from the best schools in the world, and people that didn't graduate from high school. Every single group was doing better than ever before, and it was a beautiful thing. Our country was coming together. Our country was coming together. And now we have a very divided country. We have a country that a political person uses weaponization against his political opponent. Never happened here. It happens in other countries, but they're third world countries. And in some ways, we're a third world country. We're a third world country at our borders, and we're a third world country at our elections. And we have to stop that. We need a fair and free press. The press has not been fair, nor has it been free, but maybe someday they will be. They're being beaten up pretty badly. People aren't trusting them. They're not believing them. And really, it's a very important factor. The press used to be the policeman. It used to police our country. Now nobody has confidence in them, and we have to get that confidence back. It's so important for the success of our country. So important. So this has been a day that we've been waiting for. I want to thank my family for being here. It's a great family. I have a great family. They've had it very easy since I decided to run for politics. They say, thanks a lot, Dad. We appreciate it. But they're strong, and they're very capable people, and they love the country. They really do love the country, and we appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody at my staff, Susie, Chris, incredible job. Incredible job you're doing. I read an article yesterday where it said this is one of the finest run campaigns that anybody has ever seen. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. It's really a statement. And we have no choice because November 5th, it's right around the corner, November 5th is going to go down as the single most important day in the history of our country. We're going to take it and we're going to make it like it should be, respected. Right now, we're not respected. Right now, our country is known as a joke. It's a joke. Other leaders who I speak to, other leaders can't believe what happened to us. Because 3 years ago, we were the most respected country anywhere in the world by far. We were doing things that nobody could believe. China was paying us billions and billions of dollars. In 25 years, they paid us nothing, zero, not 10 cents. I was getting billions of dollars, and they were happy about it, as happy as you can be. Of course, maybe there's reasons for things having happened, but they were not so happy with certain things, I guess, based on things that took place. But we were getting along with everybody. We were getting along, and we were respected by everybody. We had no wars. Remember when I had the debate with Hillary Clinton? She said, look at him. Look at that personality. He's going to cause wars. I said, no, my personality is going to keep us out of wars. And that's what happened. For 20 years, they were fighting ISIS. I defeated ISIS in 4 weeks. I got rid of ISIS 100%. 100% of the ISIS caliphate. And we had no wars, and we stopped wars. We weren't getting along with a lot of countries. All of a sudden, North Korea, which is a serious nuclear power, but North Korea came along. Kim Jong-un, we got along very well. We got along very well with China until COVID. That was a little bit too much, as far as I was concerned. That was too much. Couldn't take that one. But we made a trade deal with China that I don't even talk about. $50 billion a year in product they bought from our farmers, our manufacturers. They used to buy 10. I got 50, and it was great. But COVID, I don't even talk about that because COVID was such a horrible thing. It started in the Wuhan labs, just as I said, the Wuhan labs. And it came out, I believe, through incompetence. I believe it was incompetence. Some people think it wasn't, but I believe it was. But regardless, it caused $60 trillion worth of damage and death all over the world, all over the world. And we did a fantastic job on that. We never got credit for that. Unbelievable job on that. We came up with things that nobody thought was possible. Don't forget, when it came in, nobody had an idea what it was. They didn't even use the word pandemic. Nobody had an idea. But we did a fantastic job. And we got a lot of credit for the economy, a lot of credit for our foreign policy. I think credit like nobody, very few people have gotten. And the press was very honest about it. They gave us very high marks on foreign policy, the Abraham Accords, so many different things we did. But we never got the kind of due that we should have for the COVID, or as I call it affectionately, the Chinese virus, the China virus, which is a much more accurate term. And despite that, the stock market, when we turned it over, the stock market was higher than it was prior to COVID coming in. It was an amazing thing. We did an amazing job, and we have so many people that worked on that, so many of the doctors, so many of the scientists that worked with us on that. It was really, really something. But there's never been an administration that had more success in so many different elements. We got the largest tax cuts in history. We have the largest regulation cuts in history. We rebuilt our military. And what happened, we rebuilt our entire military, and beautiful. We had jet fighters that were 53 years old, and we had all brand new jet fighters. And then after this other group of people that didn't know what they were doing, they took over, and we had that horrible surrender in Afghanistan. I call it a surrender. We took the soldiers out first. You know, I dealt with the leaders of the Taliban in Afghanistan. They were the ones that were causing the trouble. The press was very angry because they said, "Why are you calling them?" I said, "Because that's where the problem is." I say oftentimes, they asked Jesse James, "Jesse, why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." And I said, that's where the problem is with the Taliban. And I spoke to Abdul. He's still the leader. Believe it or not, he's really the leader of Afghanistan, but he's the leader of the Taliban, a rough group. I say, don't ever shoot our soldiers again. Don't ever do it. Very interesting what happened is that, we were having, during the Obama administration, previously, they were shooting a lot of our soldiers. And I let them know, I said, don't ever, ever let that happen. I said in a rather nasty fashion. We don't have to go into it tonight. For 18 months, we lost nobody in Afghanistan. And then we had that horrible, horrible withdrawal where we lost 13 soldiers, 38 horribly wounded, left Americans behind. You know, you have Americans right now still behind. Call them hostages if you like. It was a terrible moment. We left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful equipment behind, jets and tanks and everything you couldn't think of, goggles, night goggles. They didn't used to fight. They're good fighters. They didn't used to fight at night, but now they do because they have goggles. They have better goggles than we have. So I just want to tell you that led to a lot of bad things, and now the worst things are happening. The things that are happening now are unthinkable, and they're unthinkable at the border. We have millions of people invading our country. This is an invasion. This is the worst invasion probably. We've never had anything like it. No country has ever had anything like it. The number today could be 15 million people. And they're coming from rough places and dangerous places. And we had that shut down. We had everything going so beautifully. When Joe Biden goes to the beach, because somebody on his staff thinks he looks very good in a bathing suit, until he can't get his feet out of the sand or lift the chair, which weighs about 9 ounces. Joe Biden, if he would have just left everything alone, he could have gone to the beach. He would have had a tremendous success at the border and elsewhere. So we're going to take back our country. We're going to make sure we are going to do it right. We're going to have the greatest economy ever in the history of our country. We're going to top what we did. We're going to become an energy center of the world. We were ready to become energy dominant, and they stopped that. They stopped that. But we're going to become energy dominant. We're going to pay off debt. We're going to do things that nobody thought was possible. You know, we hadn't done our second phase of the tax cuts. When we did the tax cuts, the Democrats fought us very hard. And now they say, well, I guess that was pretty good because we took in much more revenues after we cut taxes. And then we did all of those regulation cuts, and people were working, and everybody was happy, and we were all proud of our country. But we're going to win this election because we have no choice. If we lose the election, we're not going to have a country left. And we're going to do something. Thank you very much. We love you too. And we love our country. And we can't let this magnificent, some people call it an experiment. I don't call it an experiment. I just say this is a magnificent place, a magnificent country. And it's so sad to see how far it's come and gone. When you look at the depths of where it's gone, we let that happen. We're going to straighten it out. We're going to close our borders. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to get the inflation down. And we are going to make our country greater than ever before. And we're going to do it quickly. We're going to do it quickly. It's going to go fast. We have to get the criminals out. We have many, many criminals that have entered our country. We have people coming in from such bad places, and we're going to have to get them out. We have murderers that are being deposited into our country. We have drug dealers at the biggest and highest levels that are coming into our country. We have people coming into our country that just shouldn't be here, but many, and I say many, large percentages, they come in through the caravans, they come in many different ways. Now we find out again, they come in through airplanes, we send them in. This is crazy. But they come into our country, we're going to stop them. We're going to close our borders. We're going to have to deport a lot of people, a lot of bad people, because our countries can't live like this. Our cities are choking to death. Our states are dying. And frankly, our country is dying. And we're going to make America great again, greater than ever before. Thank you very much. It's been a big night. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Former President Trump wrapping up his Super Tuesday victory speech. The 8-month presidential election, the general election campaign, begins effectively right now. So we see President Trump walking off the stage at Mar-a-Lago, not surrounded by the usual cadre of aides and others. Chris had an assignment to get to and a flight to catch, so we will press on from here. Chris Steyerwalt, to you. Have we ever seen a general election campaign 8 months?
Well, no, certainly, I guess not since we had the last rematch between a former and sitting president. So for all the Grover Cleveland
enthusiasts out there,
Benjamin Harrison enthusiasts out there, you're back. But let me just say about that speech.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Let me just say. So that was like the rambling, the Trump that we're very familiar with. And if he could have found a way to get up there and say to the 25 or 30% of the Republican Party, I hear you, I care about you. Nikki Haley, I want you. Nikki Haley ran a good race. I really appreciate her. And do that, he could start this work. And look, we're going to see it in the suburbs of Texas. We're going to see it in places across, and we're going to see it in California. We're going to see it in all these districts across the country. The Republican Party, if we think of Donald Trump as an incumbent, which he is, right? Mm-hmm. He is the most recent person to be the Republican nominee for president, and he is going to retain that position. As an incumbent, you don't want to be losing a third of your party or 25% of your party. If Joe Biden were putting up numbers like this, what would we be talking about? He's got to fix it. And for Trump, tonight was an opportunity to put a little glissime, a little grace note at the end of this.
I'm sort of surprised he didn't.
Yeah.
I know that there were many former members of his staff, people who were close to him, who were on other networks, sort of counseling him to be magnanimous, to extend an olive branch, to, as you said, try and, as we begin the general election campaign, to try and circle the wagons.
It doesn't cost you anything to do.
Instead, you know, we heard a lot about immigration in very dark terms, talking about night vision goggles and the coronavirus pandemic and the lab leak theory. I mean, it was a very...
Well, look, you had, as I listened to it, Donald Trump on the teleprompter, and then he got through that part of the speech, and then he decided he wasn't done. And this was during the 1-hour primetime special that the networks do for Super Tuesday from 10 to 11 p.m. And he figured the networks are going to take me, so I might as well keep at it.
Yeah. I mean, there are reports of exit polls, for example, in North Carolina, where 66% of the voters who voted for Nikki Haley say Trump is not physically or mentally fit to be president. 81% of Haley voters say they are not automatic votes for the nominee. He's going to need to try and garner support. You are not going to win a general election.
To Leland's point about the long general, right? When you have this, unusually, historically long, stale general election, right? You have time to unify your party, right? You have time to unify. And what Joe Biden has been struggling with is a disunited Democratic Party that
Very
he has been
disunited.
trying to cobble together because of conflicts around Israel, around other issues, around the crackdown on immigration that
around
we're
the
going to
border,
hear on
student
Thursday.
loans.
Yeah.
So Biden's been wrestling with that part. Trump has to do some, if Donald Trump really wants those numbers that we've seen in these early polls to bear out where he is tied or even ahead of Joe Biden, he's going to need to have 95% of self-identified Republicans on his side.
Well, speaking of Joe Biden, News Nation chief Washington correspondent, also host of The Hill, Blake Berman, is at the White House. Blake, for all the things that Joe Biden and Donald Trump disagree on, today they both complained about the media.
And I think it's fascinating, Leland. You were just talking about it. You know, Donald Trump talking there at pretty much 10:15, right on the dot, giving his speech. At just that exact same time, President Biden and his campaign put out a statement. It's not coincidental that that happened basically to the minute, back to back. I'll give you some sentiment in a second, but let me get to the statement here first. Here's what President Biden had to say in part on this Super Tuesday. He says, quote, "My message to the country is this. Every generation of Americans will face a moment when it has to defend democracy, stand up for our personal freedom, stand up for the right to vote, and our civil rights." The reason why I pull that part out, Leland, out of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraph statement in full is because of this. We saw a story yesterday in New York Magazine, a very lengthy deep dive into the president and how he views things going forward. And one of the key takeaways from that, and we heard this from as top of the totem pole as you can get in Biden world in that interview, Mike Donnellan say that they are going to, the Biden campaign, double down on this idea of democracy down the home stretch. It was obviously a big part of President Biden, his campaign, the last go around. And the Biden campaign feels, we'll see if they're right or not, but they feel as of this moment in March, with some 8 months to go, that the message of democracy and freedom and personal freedoms, normally when we talk about freedom and personal freedoms, that's a conservative message, but they feel that that is going to be a winner once again in November. So that's part of the statement. The sentiment is that they feel, in speaking and going back and forth a little bit with the Biden campaign tonight, that Donald Trump has an issue with moderates within the Republican Party, and he has an issue with those who live in the suburbs within the Republican Party. When I asked specifically where the Biden campaign is seeing this, the state of North Carolina, as Elizabeth had mentioned, was noted to me specifically as one state, though they also say, and I'm interested in, I know Chris was just talking about this a little bit, as to where else it could happen across the country, but they feel that it's happening across the board as well. So that's some of the sentiment.
Yeah. You know what's interesting?
A statement from the president
I'm looking through this statement.
I would just say, in which there's very little involvement.
Yeah, I'm looking through this statement. The word abortion is not mentioned, which is the #1 issue in our exit polling for Democratic primary voters. And I'm wondering if this personal freedom, the line you pulled out, if personal freedom is not going to now be the euphemism for abortion for the next 8 months from the Democratic Party.
It's a line that it's a phrase that could encompass several things. I know, Chris and I were talking about this on the Hill last night, exactly how that phrase can sort of, if you think of like the umbrella and, you know, it pulls out 4 or 5 different spokes, I guess. That is a phrase clearly that the campaign is focusing on, and you're right to key in on it.
All right. Blake, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Race call to make. DDHQ can now project that Nikki Haley, and this is the first time I am saying this in the campaign, and likely the last, Nikki Haley has won the GOP primary in the state of Vermont. What that means could be kind of significant if something happens to Donald Trump and she shows up at the convention with more delegates than anybody else. As we approach 11 p.m. on the East Coast, the polls are closing in California. Something very unusual could happen in California. There is a chance a Republican could be on the ballot for Senate in California. That's not a guarantee because of their jungle primary. California is changing. We'll head west when we come back. They call it Super Tuesday because of the number of delegates available to be won and then pledged for the conventions. Connell McShane with us here as the Trump delegate count is going up. Not quite to the point to clinch, but it's on the way.
No, I've been doing the math, Leland, on my fingers here, and we are about half of the delegates that were available tonight go to Donald Trump so far, and the total number is well over 400. So to your point, you're not in clinch territory, but
400 fingers,
which is amazing that one person can do all of that. But if you add it all up, obviously Texas is the big one because California is still out there. But we have them estimated at 122 out of the 160 plus in Texas. Look at Colorado, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Arkansas. All of this adding up. North Carolina is the only real toss-up state on the map. All 53 go to Trump there, as well as the 33 in Virginia. Now, Maine at the top gets 20. Massachusetts, you're at 40. You notice there's one state that we've been talking a lot more than we maybe thought we would tonight that's not on the list. Of course, that is Vermont. Let's take a look at the results in Vermont. And Nikki Haley does pick up the win. I know she won in D.C. Well, she also gets a check mark tonight in Vermont. And key here is that she, at the moment, is above that 50% threshold. Not by much, but at 50.1%. That means all 17 of Vermont's delegates would go in Nikki Haley's camp. So, whatever that means, as you talked about earlier, maybe it means something when we get to the convention. For tonight, it's just one of the stories that she did very well in Burlington, and one state that Donald Trump got killed in last time around, but Nikki Haley takes it this time in the primary at least. So there you have it.
Yeah, does this change Nikki's messaging? She has no events scheduled. She has no TV bought. Does she all of a sudden decide I won Vermont, I'm going to stay in?
I don't think the maple magic. I don't think it's gonna. I don't think the Birkenstock Trump is going to give her
the Birkenstock
is going to rejuvenate her campaign. But just I think Connell makes a really important point and something really worth remembering here, which is, and as a huge nerd, I'm thinking about 1992. When incumbent Republican President George H.W. Bush was famously dismissive of a faction of about a similar size in the Republican Party. It was in those days, the mainstream was in charge, and the populist culture warriors were the insurgents, and it was Pat Buchanan, Pitchfork Pat. And George H.W. Bush famously said, the conservatives will come home to roost by November. And you know what?
And just assumed.
And they didn't. And they resented him for it. And as a matter of fact, when a interesting, charismatic third-party candidate came along in the form of H. Ross Perot, they said, well, you know what? You can go pound sand, George H.W. Bush, because we're going to check this guy out.
That goes to what we were just discussing about it. You've got to make the effort.
It happens. It happens again and again. When you have a divided party, it happens again and again.
All right. Well, let's bring in Olivia Troy, former Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor for then Vice President Pence, who is a supporter of Nikki Haley, who just won her first state. Tell me, first of all, why did you support Haley, even when you had to know that today you were voted in Virginia? Today it was such a long shot and possibly a protest vote, if most.
Yeah, look, I think it was a protest vote. I think Nikki Haley is better for the Republican brand. I think Donald Trump is devastating to the party. We've seen this play out in election after election where down ballot Republicans lose. And so I wanted Nikki Haley to stand a chance. I think she's a better leader. I think she's stronger on foreign policy. I worked with her. I saw her during the Trump administration. And I also think that she would be a better leader on the world stage, regardless of whatever speech Trump just gave about, the standing in the world. The fact of the matter is, I think we were worse off when he was in the Oval Office because of his insanity.
So we've been talking a lot about what happens to all these Haley voters, all these Haley supporters come November. We just listened to Donald Trump give a speech down in Mar-a-Lago, his victory speech. He did not mention Nikki Haley once. There, at least tonight, was no effort to sort of bring her supporters in. What do you think happens to people like yourself, a Republican, a dyed-in-the-wool Republican who voted for Nikki Haley tonight?
Look, I think that's the million-dollar question right now is what happens in November? Where do these voters turn? And I think a lot of these people are going to be anti-Trump. I think that'll be interesting. Personally, if it's Trump versus Biden, I will vote for Biden. Because I think that Donald Trump is a dangerous individual. I think he was a poor leader. I also think, look, we just watched that speech. It was full of lie after lie. I mean, he went from talking about night goggles to Wuhan to Venezuelan tar. You know, as someone who watched him call the China virus, COVID to the China virus, I mean, those things like that, all that anti-immigrant rhetoric, it actually leads to hate crimes. We saw statistically that anti-Asian American hate crimes went up when he called it that. And I keep hoping that the Republican Party will go in a different direction. But clearly, right now, this is the party of Trump. And I think the rest of us who are center-right or moderate conservatives who really detest of what has happened here will have to find a different direction. And right now, if it's between Trump and Biden, I will support the current president. I'll support Biden.
Olivia Troy, a different Republican perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Chris points out that Republican perspective exists in a group of people, whether it's substantial or not. We wait to see until November. Coming up on 11 p.m. Eastern, that means it is about to be poll closing time in California. Chris Direwald, as you can hear,
very excited.
He has had a cup of coffee. He is quite excited, and he is going to tell you why no matter where you are in America, you should care about the California primary. We'll see you on the other side. $11 p.m. here on the East Coast. News Nation coverage of Super Tuesday continues. The polls are closing in California. So far, Donald Trump has moved through the time zones like a tumbleweed through the East Texas prairie. Speaking of East Texas and the prairies, or Texas and the prairies.
I don't know. Are you from Texas?
I don't know what that was. That was a great transition.
Hotter than the devil's anvil.
Something like
Tighter than grandma's corset.
Wow. It's a tough crowd here. But speaking of Texas, there's some interesting races. The presidential primary in Texas was not so interesting.
No.
But the race for the Democratic Senate primary was.
I think so, because what it sets up in the fall, right? I mean, this could be an interesting race. So take a look at these numbers. We'll let the California numbers settle, and we'll talk about that race, which is also interesting on the Senate side at the moment. Colin Allred is a former NFL linebacker, serves in the House of Representatives. He's going to be matched up with Ted Cruz, it looks like, in the fall. He's running way ahead of Roland Gutierrez in second place in this Texas Democratic primary for the Senate. You know, immigration, of course, the big issue that we think about when we think about Texas. So the margins are going to get a little closer in some of these border counties where Gutierrez has a stronger following, but still, Allred did well, even in El Paso County. And Allred in the Congress represents the area in and around Dallas, and we look at Hunt County, 72% goes to Allred. Even Collin County, which Colin Allred represents, part of Collin County, is an 80% plus for him. So he, you know, is going to, we talk about it all the time, how the Democrats have had what some call a pipe dream of turning Texas blue at some point. Maybe Colin Allred's the guy. If nothing else, most of the analysts think he can at least give Ted Cruz a run for his money. So let's back this out now and go to the state of California. You mentioned the polls are just closing there. This is going to be a really interesting race to watch when the results actually start to populate this map and come in. You have the four candidates on the list here. Doesn't matter what party you're in. The top two, whether it's Barbara Lee, Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Steve Garvey, former baseball player, of course, for both the Dodgers and the Padres in that state. Whoever finishes in the top two will face off in November in a runoff for Dianne Feinstein, the late Dianne Feinstein's seat there in the state of California. Schiff and Garvey, we could talk about, I don't know what you guys think about this, have been interesting because there's been a lot of reporting to suggest, we had some conversations on our show earlier in the day today, that Schiff is spending a lot of money in this race and doing so to try to promote Garvey. Right?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite stories of this cycle. And so California has an innovative primary approach, which is its top two, regardless of party, that gets through. And
so it could be two Democrats in this case, or two Republicans.
Now, what Katie Porter, who is, I guess I would call her a more moderate Democrat. She's from Southern California. Schiff's from Northern California. The natural divide here is that you'd end up with Schiff and Porter facing off against each other in the runoff. But Schiff has been inflating, propping up Steve Garvey. Now, the way that you prop up Steve Garvey, it's very simple. And Democrats have done this with MAGA Republicans. Garvey's not, but he's done it with MAGA Republicans across the country. You run ads and you say, Steve Garvey's too conservative for California. Steve Garvey supports Donald Trump. So you're running what are technically attack ads, but to Republican voters in California, they're like, too conservative for California, you say? Tell me more about this guy. I may have been a Giants fan, but now I'm on board. So basically, it goes like this. If you can get Garvey, if Schiff can get Garvey into the runoff, he's done, and national Democrats are thrilled.
He clearly thinks he can beat Garvey more easily than he could Katie Porter.
He will crush Garvey like Clayton Kershaw used to crush the St. Louis Cardinals.
Boy, and you don't like my tumble, and you make fun of my tumbleweed.
No, I'm with you on that.
Well, wouldn't he save the Democrats a lot of money in doing that as well? It would be a very expensive race. Wouldn't it be two Democrats running against each other?
But then there's one more thing, and then I promise I'll shut up. So it's good for Democrats nationally because they just don't have to worry about it because it's done. On the other hand, if it's a head-to-head battle between Schiff and Porter, guess what? A rising tide raises boats for House races like Porter's own Southern California, Los Angeles County District to get more Democrats out of the bowl. If it's a snoozer, Republicans will pick up a couple of those districts in Orange County, Los Angeles County. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, but by the way, what if Garvey beat him?
Well, now then you'd have something.
Oh boy,
that'd
be a bad strategy.
Then you'd have something.
All right, so Decision Desk HQ, speaking of California, can now project Donald Trump will win the GOP primary in California, and President Biden will win the Democratic primary in California. Do not go that far, Mr. McShane, because we have some Texas questions for you. But speaking of California, News Nation correspondent Joe Khalil is in Hollywood. Tough duty on this Tuesday night, Joe.
Yeah, I've been in colder places, so, you know, it wasn't a rough night for me at all, Leland. So I'm glad that everybody teed up the conversation about Steve Garvey and about Adam Schiff. We've been following that story all day. So the flip side of that, if you talk to the Schiff folks here, and we're at his campaign headquarters right now, what you will hear them say is that they don't actually think that, you know, that wasn't their intention, right? But if you read through the leaves, you look at some of these ads that he has been running. We talked to Republican voters today who were voting in precincts in very Democratic areas. They said almost the exact line to us that you all did, which is, yeah, we saw the Adam Schiff ads. He was saying that Garvey was too conservative for California, and that made us like Garvey even more. So it appears that those ads had the intended effect. Now, we're going to find out when the actual poll numbers come in, whether it's going to be enough for Steve Garvey to mount that lead over Katie Porter and be on the ballot against Adam Schiff in November. You know, if you talk to the Garvey folks today, though, which I've been talking to them throughout the last couple of weeks or so, what they will tell you is Adam Schiff did not raise Garvey's profile. Steve Garvey did that for himself. He's a very well-known entity in California, a baseball star, and they say if you go back weeks, even early in a few months, he was always teetering at that second place when it comes to polling. He was always very close to Katie Porter, and in recent weeks, he went over it. You know, Schiff has been trying to portray Garvey as a sort of Trump-aligned Republican. Garvey sort of described himself as a Trump agnostic, and today when Garvey does give his speech, whether it's a second place or a sorry, you know, we didn't actually cross the line, I think what you're going to hear is not so much culture war issues, but you're probably going to hear him talk about crime, about the border, about affordability. So, you know, he is trying to set himself apart from what Adam Schiff is painting him. But I can tell you, the Schiff folks here, they feel very good about where they are right now. He has been a juggernaut fundraiser. He's been ahead in the polls since day one. He has not left it. He's got the Pelosi endorsement, which in itself unlocked a whole lot of money here in California for all of the ads that we've been talking about that have been running over the last few weeks. So they're anticipating these results, but they feel pretty good, the Schiff campaign does, about where they are right now. Leland.
All right, Joe Khalil, thank you very much. You have to think that the Schiff campaign feels good about where they are, that they're going to be one or two. The question is who's going to be their number two. I just got a note from a very well-placed source in the California Republican operation. The argument is Garvey was a Dodger star, and L.A. County Latinos love the Dodgers. It's a remote path, but not non-existent. So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah, and I don't mean to poo-poo. I don't mean full poo-pooing of Steve Garvey. Most of the people, everybody will. everybody voting for Steve Garvey today is either a Republican or a Republican leaner. And he would have had a bunch of support, but it is Schiff juicing him at the end, right? It's the performance enhancing drug of those Schiff ads. Pushing it up to try to get him in.
And let's not discount, I mean, listen, Schiff has had so much wind at his back. He's got Nancy Pelosi.
There's been a lot of wind. There's been a lot of wind with
Schiff.
There could be a lot of debate about what kind of wind, but there you go.
Exactly.
Okay, well, and one of the issues that Steve Garvey was running on, and our correspondent Joe Khalil just mentioned, of course, was crime. That is a huge issue, especially in the Bay Area, where our News Nation West Coast correspondent Nancy Liu is joining us. Nancy, there are several issues on the ballot around this issue of crime.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. And there's high interest here in San Francisco in the primary because of that Schiff-Garvey-Porter race. But here in San Francisco and the entire Bay Area, crime, top of mind, mental health, drug use, that is all playing into this primary election. And the polls are about to close here. We're seeing a lot of mail-in ballots being dropped off in the final minutes here. But yes, crime, I fell victim to it just yesterday, and proof that you cannot let your guard down for 1 second. And I did, because I've come here so often on assignment without incident until now. Somebody broke into our News Nation rental vehicle while we were right inside a building interviewing someone for less than 10 minutes. But my bag was not in the open. They stole my work bag, laptop, my earpiece, all of my work gear, including an iPad, gone.
Yeah,
so,
and by the way,
learning the hard way that crime very much an issue.
We should point out, Nancy, your car was being broken into while you were interviewing the owner of a restaurant who's been robbed 22 times.
Wild.
Remarkable. This guy runs a restaurant, robbed 22 times since 2016, 3 times in just 3 weeks, and all the businesses around. I mean, people were coming out to tell us what happened to them as well. Burglaries all the time, and it's just the status quo, sadly. In the Bay Area.
All right, we'll be keeping a close eye on all those measures on the ballot revolving around crime. Nancy Liu, thank you so much. This is a huge issue out there. This retail crime is staggering. There have been businesses that have closed, stores, grocery stores that have all closed down because they just can't deal with it.
Americans like democracy, and they like the good constitutional order and good character in their leaders. But if your restaurant gets robbed 22 times, you're going to go with the party or the candidate that can offer you security.
And we've also seen this issue around these very progressive district attorneys in Oakland and in Northern California. I mean, it's
happening in Washington, D.C., where I live.
There is a great quote now from D.C.'s mayor, as there is a referendum today about crime and changing crime rules in D.C. The D.C. mayor declaring she doesn't want to lock up our kids, but says, quote, we might have to if they're using guns.
Well, you got to draw the line somewhere.
Right. Fine.
You got to draw the line
Finally, you might draw the line somewhere. California will be an enormous story, no matter how things break tonight, as Sir Steyerwalt pointed out. Adam Schiff might regret what he has worked so hard to get, potentially. Brad Sherman, California congressman, is up next with that. All right, 16 minutes after the polls have closed in California, and we already have a remarkable amount of ballots in what could be the story of the night, and that is the California Senate primary. Connell McShane with us on that.
Yep, Garvey and Schiff. Schiff and Garvey, the top two go through, and it doesn't matter what party you're in, and now that's how it's been shaping up. We had this conversation already about how Schiff was supposedly spending all this money to kind of elevate Garvey. Well, Schiff has a 3-point lead over Garvey, but he certainly seems to be, with these 12% of the vote in so far, accomplishing the goal, if that was the goal, which was to keep somebody like Katie Porter below the threshold that's needed. In other words, being in the top 2. Now, if you want to start talking about some of the ins and outs and go into a place like Orange County, that's where the Steve Garvey votes are coming. And the traditionally more conservative areas of California is up at 37, shifts to 26, and much closer to Porter in an area like that. There's votes coming in from a number of other parts of the state as well, but the overall vote total statewide remains in Schiff's column. 39-35 is where we are right now. If you want to take a quick look, I know you wanted to talk, Leland, as well about Texas, just to see how that race is going down there, or how it's shaping up down there. We're on the Republican side of it right now with Ted Cruz. His opponent in the fall will be interesting. Cruz obviously winning in the primary very easily, but his opponent, when you talk about the fall race in Texas, looks like it'll be this NFL former linebacker in Colin Allred. 60% of the vote goes to Allred, so Roland Gutierrez is way behind here. County-wise, we talked earlier about how Allred is running up the score pretty much all over the state. He represents a district in the Congress not too far from Dallas, northeast of the Dallas area. A lot of the Dallas suburbs are in his district. The green is the Gutierrez area. So some of these border counties down here are doing better for Gutierrez than they were for Allred. But statewide, Allred is still your top man there at 60% of the vote. So California, Texas and California late in the night end up being a big part of the story on the Senate side.
All right, so Gutierrez is winning both his district, which is where he's the state senator outside of San Antonio, but then also the border counties down where Brownsville, McAllen, Del Rio County, I believe, all the way down to the bottom of the heel, if you will, of Texas. And I would ask Chris Stirewalt this. If Democrats are to have, in a down-ballot sense, a chance with swing-ish voters on the issue of immigration, which is an enormous issue in Texas, don't they have to nominate people much more like Gutierrez than Colin Allred?
So Gutierrez it's an interesting, there's a duality here. So on the one hand, so I'm sure part of the reason that we can see the swath for Gutierrez, so that's where the Democratic electorate is overwhelmingly Hispanic. He's also from there, so some of that is that. And then some of it also is his tougher stance on the border, or greater emphasis on border security than Allred. But outside of that issue, Gutierrez is much more progressive, right? He's coming from, so he's
interesting.
So he's right in some ways of Allred, but Allred as an overall candidate is much more moderate and saleable, because what's changing in Texas, yes, we are seeing Democrats moving. We are seeing Democrats moving to the Republican Party. We're seeing Democratic support in the Rio Grande Valley soften up. But in the Dallas suburbs, in the Austin suburbs, in the Houston suburbs, San Antonio suburbs, we're seeing Republicans softening up.
And do you think Colin Allred will be a stronger candidate against Ted Cruz than Beto O'Rourke was?
Yes, he is a better candidate in every way almost than Beto O'Rourke, because he's Beto O'Rourke, and I don't mean to pick on anybody, but Beto O'Rourke was weird, right? He was an appealing candidate from a distance, and then as you got closer, you're like, this is strange. Yeah. What's the matter here? And Colin Allred, as Leland says, football star, and he's a good retail politician. I don't think this will probably be that competitive of a race unless the national dynamic changes dramatically for Trump and Biden. But here's two good pieces of news for Democrats tonight. They're not going to have to spend money on a runoff. This thing's done. That's not going to be a cash suck there. And number two, whether it's in Texas, in this race, or in congressional races across the country that we've seen come in tonight, the progressive revolt against the Democratic mainstream, especially centered around the issue of Israel and the war with Hamas and all of that, has not materialized. Joe Biden is
That was a Michigan-centric thing.
Well, it was a Michigan-centric thing, and it was for the socialist barista crowd, as my friend Jonah Goldberg calls them. So for hardcore young Democratic progressives, it was a big
they haven't been able to materialize that into primary wins.
And so what the thing is, Joe Biden needs lots of room to run to the middle. And he's got to start on Thursday, and he needs his party to give him permission to reach out to the persuadable voters. And we've seen the New York Times Siena poll. We've seen all of this survey work that says the same thing, which is that Biden is stuck 30 points behind in favorability ratings with people who voted for him in 2020. He's got to get him back. And what I'm taking from tonight's results in Texas and elsewhere is his party may give him an opportunity that he can try to run to the middle, because he's got to do it.
This is the moment he does it, right? The general election starts tonight. Thursday's State of the Union. Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman, senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, will be there. Congressman Sherman, good to see you, sir. Thank you. All right, let's start with the State of the Union on the issue of immigration. I know you were going to tell me that President Biden can blame Republicans for not passing the Senate bill, on and on and on. Does Joe Biden need to announce on Thursday some executive orders on immigration to try and reclaim this issue?
Frankly, I think when Trump announces that he wants to make America worse, he wants to make this problem worse, and that is the reason that he opposed the compromise bill that came out of the Senate, I think that's all you need to say. To think that any political party would say we want to make a problem worse so that we can blame the other side, that says the quiet part out loud. Nobody wants to vote for the candidate that's trying to make the country worse for political reasons.
I get the talking point. That said, the polling does not bear that out. President Biden still is the one who's blamed over and over and over again on the issue of immigration. People who say immigration is important to them are voting for Donald Trump. That's how the polling works. So how does Joe Biden solve that problem on Thursday?
If you just ask, is the border crisis important to you? That's a Republican's going to say yes. But if you say, do democratic institutions matter? Does it matter whether Trump really wants to make America better? That's a Democratic question. And so I think that Biden wins this issue, not as, quote, a border issue, but in the sense of we want to elect a president who cares about America and wants to make America better, rather than one who's just in it for himself. So I think we're in good shape. I think Adam Schiff's success in California is going to help us, going to help mean that we're not spending a lot of money on either side of a Democratic race. This is a very good night for America.
All right. Congressman, good to see you. Brad Sherman of Sherman Oaks, California, no less. Thank you, sir. Always fun. You know what is interesting is that you've talked to both Republicans and Democrats tonight, and you pointed this out, Chris. Neither say we're running scared. Everybody's confident.
Well, look, you gotta run scared, and Democrats are certainly scared, right? The news in Washington for the past, not just this week with that New York Times poll, but back to the Her report and over, Democrats who, think about this change in attitude. In 2022, Democrats were like, more Trump, the better. We want all the Trump that we can get. We want to bolster Trumpy candidates in Republican primaries. We want to push it to the edge, and we're going to do that. Now you can feel the little gulp as the Democrats have said, oh my gosh, because of Joe Biden's age and because of the absolutely pernicious concerns in the electorate about his age and about his ability not just to hold office, but to run for office, they're actually scared. Now, here's the weird thing about politics. Being scared right now is good. That's where you want to be when you're running. You want to be scared. The Donald Trump we heard tonight did not sound scared, right? This sounded, and we've been talking tonight about who you pick for a running mate. Let's say you pick Sarah Huckabee Sanders. What you're saying is, we got it. We don't need to broaden the coalition. We don't need to unify the party or broaden the coalition. We can just do whatever we want to do. And that's where you get in trouble. Confidence kills in politics.
Well, and also having to manage a candidate in the way that Democrats so far have had to manage Joe Biden is going to be a difficult thing for the next 8 months of a general election in terms of how much he can be out on the trail.
I still don't see how he ends up as the Democratic nominee.
Oh, boy. Now that right there is a tease, Hank Steinberg.
Broker convention.
There we go. Yeah. Chris Steyerwalt's dream. All right. Yeah, Steyerwalt's dream. Is it possible when we come back?
All right, welcome back to News Nation's special coverage of Super Tuesday. Just moments ago, we got word from DDHQ that Adam Schiff, Congressman Adam Schiff, has made it through in the jungle primary in California. He will face either Steve Garvey or Katie Porter, it looks at this point, for that hotly contested Senate race. As you can see there right now, well, this is obviously with only 29% of the vote counted, and we've got a lot of counting still yet to go. But he is leading right now with 39.7, nearly 40% of the vote. The top two candidates, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans, will both proceed to the hotly contested Senate race to replace Senator Dianne Feinstein, who died a few months ago. All right, just before we went to break, Chris Starwell dropped a bit of a bombshell, said he doesn't think Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, which means he thinks there will be a contested.
I said, to be fair, I said, I can't see how.
Okay.
I can't see how, but I also can't see how they get rid of him. It's a real pickle.
Well, let's bring in Democratic strategist and former political consultant to President Bill Clinton, Hank Scheinkauf. Hank, you're the best person I can think to answer that question. What do you think of what Chris just said?
Poppycock. Presidents don't give up that office. Who wants to stop being the most powerful person in the world? Nobody I know. Lyndon Johnson did it in 1968. He didn't say I was not going to be the president. He said he wasn't going to accept the nomination of his party. Different issue altogether. Nobody gives that job up. And Joe Biden ain't going any place.
And you don't think, I mean, Hank, we've got 8 long months before the November election. A lot can happen. There's been a lot of concern, even among his ardent supporters, about the state of his health, his mental acuity, his fitness for office, especially 4 years preceding. I mean, what happens if he has a bad moment, has a bad fall? What happens at that convention? Who are the leading contenders to take over?
Well, let's go back a moment. Joe Biden, let's see, Donald Trump can't get the name correct of this country of Venezuela, nor could he get the name of Maduro, the president of that country, correct. So both of them have certainly dimwit problems, if that's the question. Who takes over? Joe Biden is not going anyplace. Who could take over? There's a lot of qualified Democrats, but you've never had something like this before. And can't think of one president who said, by the way, I'm leaving. I don't like being in the White House. It's a terrible place.
All right. So if you were advising Joe Biden, what would you be warning him about down the horizon?
I would tell him, don't try to be more active than don't listen to consultants who said you should go take a run around the block. Absurd. Stick to the issues at hand. The economy is doing better than it should have. We're leading the Western world, the industrial world in economic growth right now. You've been a man who brought NATO back together again, a peacemaker. You're a decent, sensitive man versus someone who, frankly, spends an awful lot of time beating up people unnecessarily and making us all ashamed. That's the story here.
So what would you advise him, Hank, to do on the border? Because we see that that's the #1 issue for many Republican voters. It is seen as a huge vulnerability for President Biden. I mean, no matter how you cut it, that's a crisis down there.
Unquestionably so, it was a crisis. The problem, frankly, it goes back to something you hinted at a moment ago. The first person there from the administration was Kamala Harris some months ago and flubbed it. Biden's got to come up with a plan, and he's got to make it bipartisan. The problem is that Trump won't let him, but he's going to try to find that. If he does, it'll be a lot easier for him to get reelected.
Isn't this the time for him to take dramatic action, closing the border, some sort of executive action?
If he can, he should. Why? People in the cities believe that the migrants are causing the crime. Get rid of crime by getting rid of the migrants, or at least controlling it.
All right. Hank Scheinkauf, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for staying up late and joining us. Really appreciate it. All right, now joining me is NewsNation political contributor, journalist, and writer Lindsey Granger. Lindsey, you are a Trump supporter. You are a Republican. First of all, I want to get your take on what we've seen tonight on Trump's very strong support. He did only lose one state. Nikki Haley got her first win with Vermont, but he's well on his way to securing this nomination in a matter of days, maybe weeks.
Well, I want to clarify. I'm an unaffiliated voter, and I also have been vehemently against a lot of things that Trump has done, and I'm not a Trump supporter. But I do think that he's showing a strong showing in today's primary, like everybody expected. And I do think that when we look at Nikki Haley and what her campaign has to do to move forward, there's been times in the last few months that I've been adamant about her staying in the race for moral reasons and because she honestly had the funding to do so. But I think as we look past what happened tonight, Nikki Haley probably likely doesn't have a chance in this race. And we look at it, it's going to be Biden against Trump. And I think as a strong critic of President Biden, which maybe what you're referring to has been, as a Black woman, I think a lot of what we look at has happened over the last 4 years Black men, Black people specifically are looking at the implications of how the economy was 4 years ago versus where it is now.
Right.
And I think as a whole, they look at their large support for the Democratic Party more than maybe any other group of people, and are frustrated at where we are and what we've been promised as opposed to what has been delivered. And so I think that those are really important issues to point out as we think about a lot of what we talked about earlier. What I heard you guys discussing was about how Biden doesn't have every single voter that voted for him 4 years ago. And I think that's because a lot of people are kind of wondering, well, what's happening? How has the economy, how has immigration, how have all these things affected me? And then what are you going to do about it? So I think a lot of people are looking to the State of the Union on Thursday to see what he has to say for himself, which will be his first, I think, official campaign speech.
Yeah, Trump has really made an effort at courting the Black vote. He is working very, very hard, and polls show that he is starting to win a certain percentage of that back. Is that speaking to that discontent you're just describing?
Yeah, I think what projections have said is that he could possibly get up to 20% of the Black vote.
That's a lot.
But I think it's important to point out that there's always been a faction of people of color that voted Republican. So it wouldn't sway too far from where people have been in most elections. I think the difference is that a lot of voters might actually consider sitting out these conversations. I read an article in NPR that particularly looked at Gen Z Black voters, and they just said that none of these candidates with their age and with their policies directly impact what would make them want to get out and vote. And I understand historically why it's so important to vote myself, and I think a lot of older Black Americans understand that. But for younger people, they just want to see some new energy and not the same old, same old. And then if you're going to talk about the particular policies, they want to see some follow through with some of the promises made 4 years ago, because the argument was, yeah, perhaps if you think that Trump is an insurrectionist, then between Trump and Biden, you possibly could not vote for Trump. Or if you think that Trump is racist, or if you think that all the many things he's been accused of over the last 4 years are true, then you have to vote for Biden. But now we're here 4 years later, and people are like, look, we're not picking the worst of two evil. We need to know who's going to actually do some work, who's going to actually maybe look at things like federal income tax and how changes made to those could affect people of color. People are going to look at policing in America and think about how that might affect people of color, and then really do things and put political and social capital invested as deeply as we're invested overseas in people of color here that are suffering.
Lindsey Granger, great to talk to you. Thank you so much. An important perspective on the shifting demographics politically around the country. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any more results? Did Connell go away with his map? No results? Okay. We're going to come back. He's getting them all ready for you.
He's in the bullpen.
He's in the bullpen, ready to unveil some new results in just a moment. Don't go away. All right, welcome back to News Nation's coverage of Super Tuesday. Let's bring in former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner and News Nation contributor Chris Hahn. He's the host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here. We're waiting for results from Texas and California, but it looks like Adam Schiff is through to the jungle, from the jungle primary to the Senate race. Curious what each of your thoughts are. Chris, let's start with you.
Well, look, I think, you got to do what you got to do in politics. And I think he did boost the campaign of Steve Garvey. But look, Steve Garvey was a well-known figure. And I did see polls early in this campaign that showed him within striking distance of second place. But it's going to be an easy win for the Democrats in California. I am not as concerned as Katie Porter about getting out the vote in California. I think nothing brings Democrats to the polls better than Donald Trump. He will be on the ballot. They will be out to fight against him, and it will help Democrats pick up seats, not just in California, but here in New York, where I am, and all over the country.
All right, Nina, what's your take on tonight? Not just the California race, but in general what we're seeing, which is a pretty strong sweep by Donald Trump and by Joe Biden, both of whom seem to be well on their way to clinching their nominations in the very near future.
Yeah, I mean, California is definitely going to go Democrat. No surprises there. I definitely want to commend Congresswoman Barbara Lee for putting up a gallant fight. As far as what's happening all over the country, I think the uncommitted, which the panel has not talked about yet, what is happening in states like Minnesota, it was a short runway between what happened in Michigan and what's happening in the Super Tuesday states today. but the uncommitted is picking up a whole lot of steam. I think we're going to look towards next Tuesday, where we have states like Wisconsin and also Washington State. And let us remember, Washington State, the largest labor union in that state, has endorsed uncommitted over President Biden. So we should really look to those states. And in Wisconsin, let us not forget that in 2020, President Joe Biden won that state by about 20,000 votes. And then President Donald J. Trump, or former President Donald J. Trump, won that state by about 23,000 votes. So the uncommitted is still going to continue to pick up steam.
Okay, just hold that thought for 1 second, Nina, because I just want to go very quickly over to Connell, who we now know who Adam Schiff will be facing off against for the Senate campaign.
Yep, it looks like Steve Garvey. It just came in, a big batch of votes came in, I believe, from Los Angeles County. I'll show you, dig in a little deeper in a moment. And Steve Garvey, indeed, does have the check mark here from DDHQ. So it's Schiff and Garvey. Remember, the top two go through, and they will meet in the November election. It was a question about whether it would be Garvey, the Republican, or Katie Porter, the Democrat. We knew Adam Schiff was going through, and now, indeed, it is Garvey. If you just look where the votes still are outstanding, Los Angeles has 738,000 votes outstanding, but a little while ago that was well over 1 million. So a number of those votes did start to come in Los Angeles County, and you can see them coming in now for Adam Schiff at 48% to Steve Garvey's 27%. Turn around here for a moment because I can hear Chris Stirewalt behind me saying, wow, and that's the LA
That's
vote.
her district.
Yep.
That is Katie. That's where she should be. That's where she should be cruising, and she's getting just clubbed there. And what a remarkable story to have Steve Garvey, Padre, Dodger, make it through. I agree with Chris Hahn. Certainly, it would be extraordinarily unlikely in a general election where Democrats who love to vote against Donald Trump will be out in force. But it's a what a moment.
If we put up the statewide once again, all right, Steve Garvey's doing a lot better, I think, Chris, than anybody thought he would. Is there a story to be written here that Adam Schiff may want to be careful, number one, what he wished for, and number two, Democrats who are now going to have to spend big money on the ad markets in Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco are slightly regretful?
I don't know how many bets I'm behind with you. I'm sure I owe you probably many steak dinners. But I will bet you as many steak dinners as you want that this will not be a competitive general election Senate race.
I'm with you on that.
I'm just glad you're admitting you owe me steak dinner.
I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do. And I like to eat steak, so it all works out.
I think we still, Chris and Nina, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm listening to all the betting going on the election coming up.
I am.
Chris, it's pretty big news that Steve Garvey made it, beat Katie Porter, and pretty big news that Katie Porter is doing so poorly in her own backyard of Orange County.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad for Katie, and I thought she was a pretty good member of Congress, and it's a shame her career is going to end like this. But no, this will not be a competitive Senate race by any definition. Steve Garvey will sign a few baseballs, make his way around the states, make a lot of people happy that they saw him because they'll remember him from his baseball years. He's not going to have a political career in the same way he was an all-star major leaguer. That is over. I think the bigger story tonight is there is still a very large anti-Trump movement that came out and voted even though they know this guy is going to be the nominee. 20 to 40, in Vermont case, 50% of Republicans came out and said, no, we don't like this guy. And I know I saw Chris talking about this earlier when George Herbert Walker Bush faced similar odds back in 1992, the first election I voted in for president. It was the signal of things to come. Yeah. And Donald Trump, for all intent and purposes, is the incumbent in the Republican Party. And there is a significant movement that just wants nothing to do with him.
All right. Look, Chris rightly points out there's a lot of parallels between 1992 and modern day America 2024. The one person we haven't heard from tonight, Nikki Haley.
It's true.
She won Vermont. She won her second primary, her first state.
Utah is still counting.
She did put out a statement. We're honored to have received the support of millions of Americans across the country. Vermont, where Nikki became the first woman to win 2 presidential primary contests. Unity not achieved by simply claiming we're united. Today, in state after state, there remains a large block of Republican primary voters who are expressing, as you point out, Stirewalt, deep concerns about Donald Trump. That is not unity our party needs for success. Addressing those voters' concerns will make the Republican Party in America better. Haley national spokesperson Olivia Perez-Cubas. So
interesting.
This is my question.
Okay.
Okay. She doesn't have any. Nikki Haley has no events scheduled, and she has no media bought. Where's this headed?
I mean, I don't know, and to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter in the same way that it doesn't really matter what what's his name, the congressman from Minnesota who's running
Dean
against.
Phillips.
It doesn't really matter whether Dean Phillips is in or out or whatever, because this race will be over. Trump will have clinched the delegate number next week or the week after, and it's all over. But the point that Haley is pushing toward is a significant one. We had a guest earlier tonight, a radio host from Texas, and he was gleeful when he said, we're driving these people out of the Republican Party. And it's like, yes, you are. You are definitely driving.
It was really something.
You are definitely driving these people out of the Republican Party. Now, the Republicans are doing something interesting, which is they've brought in a lot of working class, non-college voters that are making up for some of those suburbanites. But 50% of the U.S. electorate is suburbanites. And they're more female than male. And if you can't welcome those people into your party, you're not going to win elections.
Right. Well, we should thank Chris Hahn and Nina Turner, by the way.
Thanks to them. Yes,
for
indeed.
joining us.
We will not hear from Nikki Haley. I guess that means this evening, and Utah is still counting. Some final thoughts, some final numbers when we come back, and a look ahead as Election Day is 8 months from tonight.
Oof.
8 months from tonight, we will be putting on another pot of coffee. You all at home will be drinking another glass of wine, as we will have a long night on election night. Tomorrow's news today, though, and something that will be a theme until election night, is what's happening right now in Minnesota, Colin.
You know, I think it's interesting about it, Leland, is that we talked, or you guys were talking about Donald Trump's vulnerabilities, suburbs and elsewhere. This uncommitted vote that we talked so much about in Michigan, kind of the anti-war, young voters angry with the president's policies in Gaza. Minnesota tonight, after running at 13% in Michigan, you're seeing it at almost 20% uncommitted on the Democratic side. So why is that important? Well, for a number of reasons, but one of the things we're going to be looking at, obviously, as we wrap up our coverage tonight is just where are we going in the fall? We have our presidential prediction map up, and this is a good way to end it. We have 7 states that we have as true toss-ups. You'll notice Minnesota is not one of them. So if we start taking some of the other toss-ups, and as the polls have been showing, lean them, like Georgia, North Carolina, to the red side, even Arizona and Nevada, and some of these recent polls have been going red. You already have Donald Trump up, presuming he's the GOP nominee, which he will be, at 268 with 270 needed to win. So that's why I started to look at these states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania still on the map. And what if Minnesota is in play? If you don't get turnout, then the president has some real issues. So that's where we are.
Look, Minnesota, that tier in the upper Midwest.
Yep.
So you see Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is not, it's a politically inelastic state. It's not very Democratic, but it's consistently Democratic. It's the Democratic Texas. It's like 5 points, but it's always 5 points. But the population of, and this is really what Joe Biden is facing. This is what Joe Biden is struggling with right now, which is, think about Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There's all these suburban voters that he needs to suck up to. But there are also substantial populations of Arab American and Muslim American. There are young anti-war voters. And holding those two things in tension is extraordinarily hard. And remember, Democrats lost Michigan, the second largest, third largest swing state of them all, by just 10,000 votes in 2016.
You know where Joe Biden is headed after State of the Union?
Michigan.
Pennsylvania.
Ah, yes, Scranton Joe.
Scranton Joe will be back. So the storyline starts tomorrow morning. We have 8 months of a general election. We have never had that before. 8 months is an eternity in American politics. Literally, so many things can happen, and we'll be here to cover all of it for you. Chris is on his way to an assignment. Elizabeth Vargas here, Chris Steyerwalt, Mr. McShane, always good to have you with us. I'm Leland Vittert. Our coverage starts tomorrow morning with Morning in America as the general election fight in the United States begins. I'll see you tomorrow night.